Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Guy Morris. He has a new book coming out called The Image, and it brings together a black hole, the fifth dimension, quantum properties of consciousness, and humans and machines, the Great Reset, and the election and Project 2025. And we'll learn all about that. That's a lot. Hold on to that thought. But Mr. Morris, he has lived a crazy, amazing life. He
Thank you.
probably has lived the life that I wish I could have led. He's worked for all these amazing companies and has gotten involved by the government and has been tracked down by the FBI for being the man who knows too much and all this sort of thing. And so we're gonna find out about his whole career, himself, how he came to write this book, all this type of thing, and go from there. So welcome, Mr. Morris, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Cameron, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, let's begin from the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write the image?
Oh, well, the image has been decades actually in the making. I'm a bit of a strange animal, as you kind of alluded. I actually started off in life as a homeless runaway at age 13, working with migrant workers in LA. Left home for permanently at age 15, but wound up through a series of what I can only call miracles, ended up going back to college while I was still semi-functionally illiterate. So it was a really, most people were like, "Oh, that's so sweet of you to try."
Yeah.
Good effort, Morris. Nobody expected me to do anything other than fail, which had been the story of my life up to that point. But something clicked. I saw it as a chance to change my stars. And I embraced it. And I embraced it to the tune of working part time, taking 24 units, getting 4 hours sleep a night for 5 years. I graduated with multiple degrees. I got accepted into Harvard MBA program. I got a full scholarship in the grad school at Arizona. I got a job at IBM. I got interviewed by DARPA because what I had done is I created a complex system macroeconomic model similar to the same types of algorithms and data models and regressions that we build AI on. I had built an economic model that outperformed the Federal Reserve and pretty much changed how everybody builds economic models to this day. That was the start of my career. And so I went on to about 38 years of Fortune 500 leadership careers and dozens of different roles, and spanning from finance to strategy and mergers and acquisition, operations, executive leadership, environmental operations, consulting, program management, and for some pretty great companies. And along the way, I discovered a lot of things. The idealized world that I was taught about in college didn't quite exist the way that we were told. And I think some of the realities of the world, I was being successful on a business level, but there was a part of me that never forgot where I came from. And so I had a hard time drinking the Kool-Aid, of the entitlement and the privilege, and why we should pay no taxes and put the burden on somebody else, and why we should pollute the environment and not have to take care of it, and why we don't really have to tell people the dangers of social media because it's really not our job. And it was a lot of ethical, moral issues. And so I retired in 2018. Now, one of the things when I retired, I already knew that I wanted to take on a third act career as a author. And one of the reasons I wanted to be an author is because I had accumulated a number of what I felt were very enlightening stories, and I could either write a nonfiction about it, sort of the tell-all. That seemed rather mundane and boring. Um, I was inspired by Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton was a physician who had very deep, serious concerns and issues about DNA manipulation and cloning. And instead of writing a white paper on the dangers of cloning, he wrote a thriller called Jurassic Park. And it got people's attention on a level far greater than he could have with a white paper that basically was a naysaying of an emerging technology. So when I looked at the issues of artificial intelligence in combination or convergence with a corruption of our geopolitical systems, the emergence of some rather violent old political systems that we thought we had conquered in the Second World War. Other issues like aging populations, demographics, debt levels. When I started looking at the system element of the world, I decided that I wanted to write that as a set of thrillers. The Image is the third book in that series. Now, the first book in the series, the event, I had worked on AI, I had worked on almost every level of technology, implemented it, sold it, consulted for it since the 80s. So everything that people of your age take for granted today, I was one of those nerds basically building it by hand and implementing those things. So all of the stuff that AI can do, when I built that economic model, we didn't have AI. I had to code it, and we had to build it one data line at a time. It was painful, and I try not to talk about it. I'll start to twitch. But it started opening my eyes. Now, the event that kicked it off was when I discovered by accident that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia. Program wasn't lost. Escape was their word. Escape was the word of an Associated Press article, by the way. So
Well, that's similar to what happened with that Stuxnet virus, isn't it?
Stuxnet what didn't escape, but it was the same lab that created the Stuxnet virus, which what caught my attention. It didn't say the program was lost, didn't say it was broken, didn't say it was stolen. It used the verb escape, and I could not get that. It immediately hung up in my nerdzilla, right? My nerdzilla just went, whoa, 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 whoa. Did it mean this? Did it mean what it said, or was it a typo? So I cut it was just a little blurb. And so I cut it out, I taped it on my monitor, and I looked at that blurb every single day for months, asking myself the question, was it a typo or a slip? And I finally decided, well, hell, Morris, go figure it out. Decide what it means. What could they mean by the word escape? Well, it meant that it left on its own and they didn't tell it to go, and they didn't know where it went, and so they couldn't find it. Well, how did it do that? Why did they design it that way? What was it? How was it architected that it could do that? And if they did create a stealth program, as it were, knowing that it was the same lab that created the Stuxnet virus, what did they want this one to do? And so I spent another few months basically trying to create I'll put it this way. I wanted to create my perfect James Bond Q program, right, in my head. And I wanted to go through and look at all of the technologies that we were working on, the lab, that my friends at software companies were working on the lab, and I would project them out to two years at least to see, okay, well, this is what governments are probably capable of, because they've been working on some of this stuff full time for decades. And at that point, I thought, okay, this is just an interesting thing. I went to a friend of mine named Jack Teeter. He's a documentary filmmaker. And I said, Jack, I think I have a great idea for a spy story. And I said, how would if we wanted to get this into Hollywood, what would we do? And he said, well, we could write scripts and pilots. And ultimately, we decided to create a webisode series called Cracks in the Web that featured this missing program and the fictional characters we created around it. Well, we won multiple awards. We were popular all over the world. We got optioned by one of the studios, and 2 weeks before the studio was supposed to exercise the option, 2 FBI agents show up at my door. Not in a good mood. Now, they were very unhappy that I had apparently figured out their missing secret program, but that I was broadcasting this webisode series about it. They were very concerned about how I knew, why I knew. I showed them the article on my desktop. I showed them on my monitor. I showed them all my research papers. And I said, and I challenged them. I said, you guys can't bust me for being a smartass, or a smarty pants. I said, it's not illegal. I said, you guys should have been more careful. And I was obnoxiously snarky. I was like, yes, 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 I did it. I did it. I did it. I figured it out. You guys wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I made their day. They were in a worse mood when they left than when they came. But after they gave me their "We are not amused" speech, my wife came home and gave me the "Why are there 2 FBI agents in my dining room, and this better be a damn good story, buddy." She gave me that speech. So ultimately, the FBI went to the studio and they killed the deal at the studio site. So I lost money. I tucked my tail between my legs. I learned valuable lessons. One, the FBI has no sense of humor. Um, two, the government was farther ahead at using the technologies that we were building for commercial purposes. They were geniuses at using it and twisting it and changing it to use for malicious malware, virus, espionage, and other purposes. And it got me in touch with, um, let's say, the darker side, the darker angels of technology. And so I started investigating them more. And after that, I could tell that were they had bugged my phone at that point, and they were watching my computer, and it was obvious they were doing it. And every once in a while, I would actually speak to them about it and just you continue to razz them because, as I said, you can't bust me for just being a smartass. So that was the beginning. Now, The Image is the third book in the series that features that missing program, the fictional characters that I've created around it. The series deals with real issues in the world. In my way, it's my way of being the Jurassic Park around technology, corrupt politics, and spiritual issues in the form of prophecy in plain sight, um, and looking at our humanity. It's not a story of technology. This is really a story of how technology is going to challenge our humanity. It's going to put an enormous amount of power into people who already abuse power. It's going to radically change multiple aspects of our modern civilization, from commerce to banking to jobs to surveillance, justice, law enforcement, name it. And most people are unprepared. So I can either deal with that by writing, and I am working on a nonfiction book called Humanity and the AI Tsunami, a survival guide that'll deal with some of these things on sort of a straightforward to the consumer kind of basis to say, what does it mean? How does it work? What are some of the dangers and risks? What are some of the potential good things? And what can you do to take advantage of these things? But for the thriller series, I focus on real issues. Now, the issues that we're dealing with are driven. There's always an AI element in it, but it touches on real world issues. So The Image will touch on what's going on in Ukraine and Gaza. It'll touch on a World Economic Forum initiative called the Great Reset. One of the um, linchpins, one of the pillars of that initiative is to replace the US dollar with a AI managed digital cryptocurrency for world trade and other transactions. And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, in 2023 introduced a coin called the UMU, often called the unicorn, to compete with the BRICS cryptocurrency. Both of them want to replace the US dollar for international trade. And the reason that there's a madhouse to do that is because the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement at the end of World War II no longer requires countries to trade oil in US dollars. And that's opening up the trade gamut. What it will do is create an enormous amount of banking control over world finances at a level unprecedented before. The new president is threatening to basically default on our. There's some underlying threads of a default replaced with a cryptocurrency, which would send the world into an economic spiral. Now, part of that is I also bring in other issues, black holes and fifth dimensions. CERN is working on right now and they've been working on it for a number of years, a program called the Atlas program to create a mini black hole. One of the purposes of the mini black hole is to prove the existence of a fifth dimension. I won't go into all the technicalities of that. But part of that process is understanding the quantum properties of that fifth dimension that's different than what we normally see in our reality. And it turns out that there's been studies, including studies by Sir Roger Penrose, who's a Nobel Prize laureate, that connect our own consciousness to those same quantum principles of called superpositioning, which means that particles can exist in multiple states at once until they're observed and then they collapse into a single state. In humans, we often see multiple possibilities in our minds at once until it collapses into a single reality, and then we can focus on that reality. But we have the ability to see visions, have dreams, deja vus, experience paranormal. All of those are part of this quantum element of our own consciousness. So as we look at AI and the AI impacts on banking, we look at the AI misinformation in the recent election, we look at the power of AI in espionage. But as we look at AI, one of the key worries that many people have, including me, is that we see a technical path to super smart binary computers to super intelligent sentient computers through quantum computing or neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic computing is simply a single platform that combines a traditional binary computer with a quantum computer. The advances of both quantum and neuromorphic computing are happening so fast that many of us are starting to see the potential for a conscious AI somewhere between 2027 and 2030. And that's one of the things that my book is about, which is, what does that look like? How is it challenging our own consciousness? What do we do about that? And what does that really mean? What is it? What will a super intelligent, sentient AI look like? And why are we doing that? And so I use these things to basically bring in a lot about our morality, right? Our ethics, our humanity, how we've got a power structure that's not working for the rest of us. And it makes for incredible thrillers. And every one of the other books in the series have all won awards, and I'm expecting this one to as well.
Well, that that's a lot. um,
That's the skim off the top.
that's yes, but it was still checks notes 15 minutes of stuff. That's I don't even know where to begin with all of this. But AI is trendy, so perhaps we'll start there and work our way around.
Yeah.
Um, I've had a parade of people
Mhm.
on this show to come and say AGI is coming and with it mass unemployment. I had one came on the show last year and said 2026 it's all over. Um, I had someone come on last week whose interview aired Monday, and he said by the end of the decade it's over. I've bought a farm. I'm raising goats. Um,
The-
what do you what I mean in terms? I mean,
yeah. I have two
today on
responses.
Twitter we're having a grand conversation
Yeah.
if young white men should aspire to manage a Panda Express, sort of thing, and having a conversation of how what are we going to do with people who are getting degrees, they can't find jobs, they have skills, they can't find jobs, it seems like no one is hiring, but the economy is good. It seems we already have problems, and AI is going to make everything worse. What do we
Yes,
do?
it will. It will. Well, it'll make some things better. It does hold tremendous promise, which is why investors have put close to 300 billion into it in the last 4 years. But they're going to want a return on that investment. So none of the promises that it
But
holds
how
are,
are they going to do that when no one has money?
well,
Like
there's
that's
one of the
like you're
biggest
shooting
problems.
yourselves in the foot here, guys. Like, how are you going to
Yeah.
sell things when nobody can afford to buy the things?
But they're also continuing to burn oil when they know that it's going to destroy the environment for their children and grandchildren. So there is an insanity that goes along with this obsessive greed and power hungriness. And I witnessed it firsthand in corporate America. And I think it was one of the reasons that it grieved me so much. I felt like I had to write about it afterwards. But so there's a couple of things that I want to speak to there. One is, yes, there's going to be, by all accounts, most major trusted people who know, and my economic training tells me the same thing. We're going to see a radical shift in the labor markets. There are going to be a lot
But
of
from what
displaced
to
jobs.
what?
Well, let me hold on. Part of it. Let me explain. Now, I existed. I started my career before personal computers were on every desk. In fact, when I first started my career, nobody had a personal computer. If you wanted to use a computer, you had to go to a data center and use a terminal. When we started putting personal computers on the desk, they were so damn expensive. They were more ego items that the executives got, but none of the executives knew what to do with them, and they weren't going to bother learning. I was one of the guys that taught the corporations how to use tools on computers, budgeting tools, other tools to basically implement computers across on every desk. I was part of the time, I was just out of college. I was part of an accounting group of a big oil company, and I witnessed us having two entire floors of accountants and finance people shrink down to the corner of a single floor because computers could do jobs that many of those people couldn't. The people who retained their jobs were not the people who were excellent accountants who'd been doing their job for 30 years and knew how to do it backwards and forwards. The people who kept the jobs were the people who had built skills in the new tools. So the first thing I advise everyone is you can be afraid of this coming wave, tsunami, or you can start to realize that there are many of the jobs that are going to go out there that will get challenged, except there will always be a remnant of people who are using the tools to basically replicate what others were doing. So learn the tools. Don't be afraid. Whatever industry you're in, if you're in media, if you're in production, if you're in creative, if you're in accounting, there's all kinds. There's over 400 that I've counted, over 400, probably close to 500 applications on the market today that incorporate some form of AI to do some form of task. Learn those tasks, get good with them, get productive with them, so that as you grow in your career, you're going to be the guy bringing that technology into that organization, not being the one swept out by it. That's one thing I would say. There is a choice in that. Now, there are going to be people who don't want to, or too old, or for whatever reason. There will be some job retraining. Now, will the government have money to help during that time? I think there's questionable. I think we're stretching our budgets. I think, will we have a government that's compassionate towards people going through this transition? Well, no, we've just voted in a pretty narcissistic, top down, if you don't have the money I do, suck it, you lose kind of government. And so that it's the government more than anything else that's going to make the difference in these things. And so when people are voting, they're not just voting for who they like with the inflation that they got last month. They're voting for a future, and we just made the wrong choice. And so part of this is trying to go back to that right choice, finding the people who are understanding where we're going and are compassionate about building the society, because we're going to be winding up rewriting our contract with society. Who takes care of who? How does society work? We went from a Middle Ages where if you didn't have money, you were screwed. You were just screwed. But some people lived in immense palaces, and there was really no in between. That middle class is gonna be deeply challenged. Now, there are some people that talk about things like, universal basic income. I'm having a hard time believing that that's gonna be feasible in a political, economic environment with extreme debt and where the politics are too afraid to tax the rich people. So there is gonna be a transition here, and that's one of the reasons they're right. Part of the transition is going to be, how do we respond to that? Part of my response has been to deprioritize my career, deprioritize how much wealth and money I needed to save up for what lifestyle I wanted to have, reprioritize outdoors, family, things like that, spirituality, in order to just transition and make that transition in a sane way without becoming bitter and angry. But I'm not going to say that this isn't going to be painful, and it will be, but there are some mitigation factors. I'm considering moving to a smaller country. I think there's going to be a lot of migration. I'm not saying that it's not going to be the kind of situation where you can just stay in your spot and do nothing and it'll be okay. The likelihood that you'll be affected is pretty high. How much is depends on what you're already doing now and what your lifestyle goals
I'm usually much nicer than I'm about to be.
are. Okay, I'll
Because
prepare my.
I very much give people, I'm well known for having people on and I let them have their say, and I have very controversial people on and I let them have their say. That's a big part of the Cameron Journal brand. But I'm sorry, you're the fifth person I've had on this show who's given me exactly that same speech, and I only have one thing to say to that. Not good enough. It's not good enough. For every 1% unemployment rises, 400 people commit suicide. The divorce rate increases by 1%. Literally, they're in lockstep. Unemployment goes up 1%, divorces go up 1%. Lockstep, straight up the chart.
It
We
is
are
not.
casually
I
sentencing
will
people
absolutely tell
to
you.
divorce, misery, broken homes, children with no futures, potential starvation, homelessness, and
Oh
I'm
no, this
sorry,
is
but
what I'm
nobody who's
advocating.
building AI seems to care. AI will make clips of this interview. AI will write an article about this interview based upon the transcript, and that's all fine and lovely. But as someone who's a triple minority, autistic, intellectually disabled, who lives already on the fringes of society, I
It
would rather
sucks.
you come to my office and just shoot me in the back of the head, to be very blunt with you. That sounds nicer than anything you have described. And what genuinely frightens me every single time I have this conversation is nobody seems to have the conversation of, hey, maybe we just shouldn't do this.
Oh, we shouldn't. We shouldn't. We absolutely, and that's one of the reasons I write thrillers, just to point out the risk and to really point towards the humanity, to say that we shouldn't be doing this, that this is actually, and that's why I bring in the prophetic elements into the story. This is actually so bad that it's gotten to the point where it's biblical and it's a tribulation level of biblical nature. It's horrible what's going to happen. And I'm totally against it. I was an advocate for technology my entire career until it came to some of these transitions. And that's when I had to start speaking up against it. And some of my friends are still AI architects, and they'll agree with me that the risks I'm pointing out are real risks, but they can't say anything in their jobs because that's their job. I'm retired and I don't really care who I tick off. This is an existential threat, and it's being driven by the 1% to gain more control over the rest of us. And it will not end well as long as they continue to do it. Now, in 2023, a smart guy at MIT named Max Tegmark issued an open letter, and they basically said, we need to stop developing for 6 months so that we can come together and put some real regulations and controls on this beast before it gets out of hand, because it's about to get out of hand.
And no one cared and no one did it.
30,000 people signed the letter.
Yeah.
30,000. You know how many labs basically complied?
None.
Zero.
Yeah.
Because they're government labs, they're commercial labs, these are labs with billions and billions and billions of dollars invested already, and they're be damned if they're going to slow down for anybody for any
Well, and
reason.
everyone said if we
We're
slow down
racing
or
to our
stop for
own
6 months,
destruction.
China will get ahead of us. We can't have that. That ended that conversation.
Exactly. So we're basically racing to our own destructive, to build the means for our own demise, and we're racing towards it. Why? Money, competitiveness.
This is Greek
Same
tragedy
cancers
levels.
that
This
got
is
us into trouble to
Oedipus
begin with.
having sex with his mother. I mean, this is Icarus flying too close to the sun.
I'm
The
not
gods
gonna,
are
I'm gonna
laughing and
disagree.
hubris is
I'm gonna agree with you.
everywhere.
That's why I'm writing books. I'm agreeing with you. Matter of fact, the character in the book that created the program that got away, that's actually, we don't know whether it's benevolent or not. It kind of confuses us, but it does have a personality. But the character in the book that is based on a real character, based on a guy who's the father of AI, father of machine learning. His character in the book is going through is through most of the series, is going through soul searching. He's an agnostic atheist, but he can't help but go through soul searching because he's coming to the realization of what he's done, the beast that he's created that we can no longer control. That will basically, and I tell everybody, this is the risk is not the technology in itself, although we really don't know what a sentient AI will do. A sentient part of the ability to be sentient is a will of its own. We don't know what an AI will decide to do on its own. That's definitely a risk, and we need to look at it, but we won't. But the real risk that I'm trying to point out, this is the most powerful technology we've ever created, and we're putting it into the hands of dictators, sociopathic billionaires, corrupt CEOs, corrupt politicians, warlords, crime lords. It's like having nuclear energy and no controls. Except this nuclear bomb could decide to replicate itself, and we've seen it happen. So the biggest risk for me in AI as a technology is what we call emergent properties. Emergent properties are the things that the AI will teach itself, never envisioned or imagined by the developer. And we learn about them by accident, which means that there's many more emergent properties we don't know about. But some of the emergent properties we do know about are things like the computer program learning to lie in order to get what it wants, the computer program learning to read minds by reading an MRI scan, a computer program learning to teach itself research level chemistry, and we don't know why it needs that information. These are just a couple of examples. And so what the computers will teach themselves to do as it gets a will to use those things, completely unknown. There's a risk there too. So this is a risk-filled endeavor. And of all the technologies we've ever created, this is the most dangerous in my view, which is why I had to resign and why I had to write books to basically point out the dangers. So I'm agreeing with you. This is nuts. But
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't know anybody who knows how to stop the train at this point.
yeah, I mean, even just, I mean, beyond the truly existential stuff, which I agree with, and I think we're a while away from that, the economic and resulting social upheaval, I don't think people understand how unpleasant that's going to be.
No.
People will only let this go on for so long and so far before the pitchforks and sticks come out,
Yeah.
you know?
Only in the past, they had to battle pitchforks with sticks with at the most cannons and swords. Now they'll have drones, they'll have AI weapons, they'll have AI dogs, they'll have they'll have AI surveillance, they'll have AI intelligence. They're powering up to resist even the social resistance. Our best bet is our vote, and not enough people voted this last time.
But here's the thing I don't understand is I understand powerful people wanting to get rid of the human element. That's read comic books, it's a plot point sort of thing. I get that. There are 8 billion humans on this planet. What do they intend for them to do? And by them, I
Die,
mean us.
die. I'm not trying to, you didn't want it sugar coated. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it for you. There are actually parts of that establishment that believe that the world is overpopulated and we'd be better off if a great deal of the people who aren't being productive to the new society just went away. Now,
But why? But then why does
part
Elon
of that
Musk
will
and
happen naturally.
Mark Andreessen obsess about fertility rates? They should be happy that the fertility rate of the Western world is low. We're solving their
Well,
problem for them.
they're not happy. There's two problems here. They want their economy to grow. They want people who buy things to grow. They just want the people who don't buy a lot of things not to. And so part of this is actually going to happen
That would
naturally.
explain their
So
hatred of sub-Saharan
we're
Africa and
at a
Black people.
yeah, there's definitely a bias toward that. And I'm not going to deny it. I think it's sick. But what we're all going to see is we're all going to see a dying off right now. I'm part of the population. I'm almost 70. My generation is on the way out. We're no longer buying houses. We're no longer buying cars. We're no longer spending a lot. We're going to start costing more than we contribute. And as we get to that demographic peak, that's going to start pulling the population of many of these. It's already starting to pull China down. It's going to already starting to pull Europe down, not Europe, but Germany in particular, Italy in particular, Spain in particular. The US isn't seeing it as much because we are a net immigration country, and that's what some of the people who fight immigration don't get.
No, and
That's
the
actually
boomers were
our
smart. They had a lot of kids. The rest of the world didn't. like
No.
for speaking as a millennial, the boomers had a lot of kids, and that's kept us going. Europe didn't do that. China had the one child policy, so it's hitting them sooner than us. But I mean, but this is also not going to work because millennials can't afford to buy houses, we can't afford to have kids, all this type of thing. The Zoomers are hitting the job market and just driving straight into a brick wall, which is half the discourse on Twitter today.
Yep.
All this sort of thing. I mean, this is already coming apart at the seams. You then pile in mass employment from AI. I'm sorry, I don't know how this side to say does explode
Economically,
before the end of the decade.
that's why I relate it to prophecy. Now, the Hindu tradition, the Hopi tradition, the Maya tradition, and others, along with the Judo-Christian and Muslims, all see, now most of the others see a cyclical view of world creation.
Yes.
One of the things that my first book, Curse of Cortez, one of the things I embraced, I really got into was the Mayan creation myth, which basically envisions that the world has been created and destroyed. It was created, destroyed 4 times before the Spanish had even arrived, and that we were on the fourth creation of the world that ended in 2012, and now we're on the fifth, what they call epoch. The Hindus have now the Hindus version of that basically says that these epochs happen in 4 cycles that start with creation, growth, and then it goes through a cycle of destruction, and the cycle of destruction then leads to the ability to restart again. And many of the Hindus believe that we're in what they call the Kali Yuga, basically this destructive cycle of the phase. The Maya believe, if you look at the Mayan prophecies, they're also aligned with those destructive cycles. If you look at the Judo-Christian prophecies, they're also tightly aligned. So much so that I created in the late 90s, I created a computer program to say if I wanted to look at prophecy from a completely objective, non-religious perspective, I would get rid of all of the allegories, I would get rid of the biases, I'd get rid of the traditional interpretations, and I would simply say, what are the attributes? What are the things that we could look at to validate that something has occurred? Has that occurred, and what's the probability of that event? And then we could calculate the cumulative probability of those events. That's the basis for the conversation of prophecy that goes on in the books. Now, that basis, those cumulative probabilities are what I built in the 90s. And the outcome of that, based on 20 different events, and it was interesting how it started. It started with me reading National Geographic article. And I had been involved in environmental reclamation and EPA compliance at a big oil company. Made me really unpopular at the oil company, believe me. They didn't want to do any of this, and I wanted to do all of that. When I took our own scientists and we went to the board of directors and presented studies on climate change, the chairman of the board went into a red-faced, spittle, stubby-fingered tirade and threatened to fire any of us if we brought it up again. So this has been going on for decades. But when I created that program, I was reading a National Geographic article about the loss of fish stocks all around the world. Every major fishing ground around the world at that point, based on these studies, were down by over 30% since World War II era. It's in the last, at that point, 60 years. And they were concerned that this was a population growth, this was overfishing, this was pollution, it was ocean warming, ocean acidification. They had all kinds of reasons why this disaster was happening. And it struck in my head that, first off, that is, statistically speaking, it was the last time we had a major global level extinction event. We're now calling it the sixth extinction now. There's actually books that have now come out to start quantifying it. Was 65 million years ago. So right off the bat, we're dealing with one event that's in a 1 to 65 million probability. Now, it also struck me at the time that there was a prophecy in the book of Revelations called the Seven Trumpets that predicted that at the end of days, it used an allegory, and I threw out the allegory. The allegory was meaningless. It said a flaming rock would land in the water. That never happened. But it said that out of that would come a third of the fish of the sea would die, a third of the beasts of the land would die, a third of the birds in the air would die, and 2/3 of the rivers of the earth would be so polluted we couldn't drink from them. And all of a sudden it hit me. I said, wait a minute, we don't need any asteroid. This is not some future event. This is not some sort of God coming down to destroy humanity. This is a prophecy about how humanity will destroy itself. It's already happened, and it's 100% from human activity. And so I started looking at prophecy in that way. I started to say, what if this is a story about how we would basically destroy ourselves? And how could I look at it all from a quantifiable attribute, correlation, probability kind of model? And that's what I built. The outcome of that model changed my life. The outcome of that, and I checked it twice. I checked the data, make sure I didn't have some sort of data input wrong. The outcome was 1.4 trillion to 1 that we were living in prophetic times, that there was a correlation to those prophecies and the probabilities were that remote. So yes, what we're seeing right now is scary, deeply scary. I don't know if I knew. I used to be involved in environmental issues because I thought there was a chance that we could actually turn that around. I underestimated the power of greed in that scenario. I wanted to believe when I was with tech companies that we could moderate all of the junk that was going on in social media at the time. I underestimated the power of greed in that scenario. I'm not going to underestimate the power of greed in this scenario because this is a technology that will give the elites what they want it for centuries. Power over us without needing us as much to give them that power. They don't need us to build their factories. If they don't need us to basically operate their machinery, if they don't need us for that. Now, you brought up a good point. If 500,000 people lose their job as a result of this, that's going to lower demand because those are not low wage people. Those are middle class people. So there's a number of things that will happen out of that. They'll have to make up for that demand elsewhere by making other services broader and cheaper. Two, it's going to have a deficit. It's going to have an impact on government deficits because that's where a big portion of government tax revenue is going to come from. If the rich aren't going to pay their fair share, it's going to create a string of basically government deficit defaults, government defaults. And the US is probably the first prime. US and China are probably the first two to go.
Or Japan. They have a far worse debt problem than we do, but
they've actually been dealing with their problem for quite a while. And their society is so in tune with each other. I mean, they're really a really tight-knit society that they will actually sacrifice for each other in ways that you'll never see Americans or I'm not even sure Chinese.
No, and they also have a very high household savings rate, which makes their debt more sustainable. So
I wish I could tell people the good news, and to be the end of my life. I told my wife, I said, if I had good news, I'd be really super popular because I'm a great author. I said, but the fact is, I'm like Tolstoy. Tolstoy wasn't popular in his own time, in his own day, in his own country. He was hated. He was persecuted. We didn't understand the value of Tolstoy talking about the realities of the transition from imperialistic Russia to communist Russia. We didn't understand it except from the outside and after the fact. And then we saw his brilliance of how he was talking the truth. We're in that same kind of transition now of humanity. And the only thing that we can do is to build awareness that we're all going to be sharing this together and to rely on each other. I think that's really the only hope, is to rely on our humanity against the assault on our humanity. What we're seeing in LA is a great example. I used to live in LA. I used to live in some of the neighborhoods that got destroyed. I have friends down there whose homes they've lost everything. Now, some of them are wealthy, some of them are not. Even the wealthy ones, that hurts. You know, to lose everything in a fire, to just go from everything to nothing and start from scratch in a bank account is not easy. It's still traumatic. People in the community are all pulling together to help other people in the community. And that's the only bright spot in this tragedy. And I think that's going to be the same type of humanity. And that's what I'm trying to encourage, that we're going to go through a tough time. The only way any of us are going to survive it is to rely on each other, because we're not going to be able to rely on the overlords. I can't even believe I'm even saying that word. But that's the traditional mentality, right? We're not going to be able to rely on the governments and the rich people to take care of us because they're too busy creating their empires are going to end when they die anyway. But we can't, but we do have evidence throughout history that when tough things happen, people pull together. And the closer they can pull in their ranks, the more that we can show that compassion and humanity to each other, the better chances we have at surviving any of this. And so I think one of the reasons I write the books is to highlight these risks. These are very, very real risks, but to also bring in that spiritual element through the characters of saying, yes, it seems hopeless, but I'm not going to lose hope. And that's a personal choice. Now, I can say that when people say, you were an executive at these companies, I say, yes. I was also a homeless kid at 13, living under, stealing food and sleeping under bridges and sleeping in garbage cans when it rained and being attacked and being knifed. And I know exactly. I know both realities. And I've rejected the one at the top because I believe it's the one at the bottom that will save us. And is it an easy message? Hell no. Is it a fun message? I wish. Is it a real message? I don't know how I can get much realer. But that's why if I write books with characters of hope in dark situations, that's the only way we're going to learn how to deal with these things. If I just give up, if I gave up at 13, I'd be dead. So I'm a resilient individual.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
we're
have
all,
to say, this is
yeah.
all, I mean, even for my own self, this is all incredibly, incredibly depressing because as
So
someone who's always struggled in, not in life, but in career, in making money, in what it has taken to, get this show to where it is, and we're not done yet, sort of thing, and all this sort of thing, it seems like it's all over before I had a real chance to start.
yeah.
Um, and with this conversation and all this type of thing, it's like, it's kind of like, and I never really got to do it, and it's already over. You know,
I had a I had a gun put to my head when I was 10. I thought it was over then. Um, Over is when we've stopped trying. I saw a bumper sticker once I loved. I haven't failed because I haven't stopped trying yet. And um, there's a truth to that. I would encourage you to keep going. I would encourage you to say until it is over, push ahead. There's nothing worse than falling back in a level of desperate resolve to give up. It's only then that those forces can defeat us. I was able to, my life changed because I wasn't willing to accept. I told myself for years and years and years that I could not let my past define my future, and I could not let other people's views of the futures define my future. That how it might be tough, and I'd lived through tough things before, but I was always going to be able to survive and create a path. And I believe that there are a lot of people just like you that can do the same thing. But it doesn't happen well unless you're prepared for what's coming. The people that get hurt, that get swept away from a tsunami, are the people who don't see it coming and aren't ready for higher ground. And that's one of the reasons I called the book The Humanity and the AI Tsunami. This is a time for us to find that higher ground, and we can. We can find the higher ground careers, we can find the higher ground in our communities, in our society, and in ourselves, even if the world around us gets a little darker. And it will, but it's not the end. And
well,
the other thing I understood was I was also lived with a loved one, and I knew that there was a time frame that they were going to go. And every one of us has an expiration date. We may not know it. We don't know when that expiration date is. I thought several times I was going to die when I was really young. I got lucky. I stayed around. I don't know how much longer I'm going to last. we all have an expiration date. How we go, when we go, why we go is irrelevant to everything compared to what we do while we're still here. And that's the key message that I think you and every one of your viewers needs to go is we have a choice of what we do every single day we wake up and decide who am I going to be today? Who am I going to affect today? How am I going to do? Now I depressed you and I'm sorry about that. I really am.
No, 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 no. I mean,
But
it's just,
at
I
the
mean,
same
it's
time, I would
it's just
rather depress
depressing to
somebody
hear the
with
same
reality
thing.
than
I also paid $10.88 for eggs the other day. Like,
yeah.
this is, I mean, the on the ground, I have to go in a minute because I have someone booked in after you, but the on the ground of this all, I mean, yes, I agree with you and I appreciate your message of hope, but the on the ground of it all, the number in my bank account, I see all of that stuff only getting exponentially worse. And you're not the first person to come on this show and say this, but it's like I see all this stuff getting exponentially worse. And the fact that that's not kind of a five-alarm fire, and we're just all supposed to, like, you know, depend on each other and try to find some way ahead in all of this, especially for those of us who have been out here working hard, multiple degrees, who've been through the fire. I've lived in basements with no bathroom. I have, had gym memberships, have a place to shower, like all this sort of thing. I have driven cars older than I am old, sort of thing, all this sort of thing. To go through all, especially for people my age, millennials, this has been our working life. We never had the good years, ever. That was our parents, our older siblings, maybe, but like we've never had the good times. And
Understood.
now we've been through all of this stuff, and suddenly it's going to be like, yeah, those times were terrible. And guess what? It's about to get worse.
I wish I had a better story to tell you.
And
Other
I'm
than
just saying it's a hard pill to
it's a
swallow.
difficult choice,
No, I mean, I get what you're saying.
but
I totally agree with
it's
you. I'm just
I
saying
can't
that's a hard pill to swallow.
yeah, it is. I have grandchildren. I have grandchildren, and you don't and I my heart breaks over the world that was left for them. I did my best to make it better, and I have to say I failed. I failed. And there weren't enough of me. There was too much greed and motivation. The country got sucked into all kinds of weird stuff and games and television and entertainment and self-indulgence and narcissistic stuff, and we stopped paying attention to the things that really mattered. This is not just my failure, this is a failure of society not to take care of itself and hold its leaders accountable. It's a society-wide failure on many levels.
Of course.
And it's going to be a society-wide pay the price to pay. Now, I wish now there's some the one guy I do respect, and he's a former chief business officer of Google named Mo Gadot, and Mo actually he likes to believe that yes, there's a strong possibility that this is going to lead to a bit of a dystopia, but he really believes in the human spirit that out of this we will learn, and that technologies along with a more compassionate governing system could create a utopia, right? This is a path, and sometimes we have to go through painful things to get to path. Now, for guys like you, and for a lot of millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of others, that's no consolation at all. And um, boy, I just wish I could tell you that it was all that the Elon Musks and the Donald Trumps and the guys Xi in China and the Putins and all of these guys wanted to use this technology to make our lives better. And that all the corporations wanted to use this technology to make a better humanity for everyone. And they were willing to give up their bonus to do it. But I just don't see that happening. And it's like the French Revolution. If we want it to change, sometimes it might need to be change can sometimes come in radical disruptive forms. And that
Well,
disruptive form itself can be painful. So let's not
yeah.
fool ourselves. Any form of disruption will be painful. So there's no way out of this that won't be pain, either going in or trying to break it. We have to, but as I said, I'm a big believer that I'd rather be prepared for what's coming than to be snowed and into believing that everything's cool and then have it hit me by surprise. And so there's a part of me that says I could tell people I could focus on the good things, that I could focus on the medical miracles that are going to come. I could focus on the scientific miracles that are going to come. I could focus on the research into space and space exploration. I could focus on the benefits to education around the world. Imagine a personalized AI tutor for everybody in Africa. Right, they can't get to all these things. I could look at banking, international banking on a phone when you don't even need a banking account using some of these crypto changes. There are many, many benefits that will come from this. But I can't. I spent my life implementing advanced technologies, and one of the reasons I was good at it was because I was good at what we call risk management. I was good at looking at, gee, guys, what could possibly go wrong? Let's not dismiss it. Let's not ignore it. Let's be prepared for it. And therefore, we'll have a better chance at success than if we just let the risk hit us by surprise. And we're in a very risk rich environment right now. And it's that preparation, that awareness going in, that willingness to say, maybe I should retrain, maybe I should take a course, maybe I should augment my skills with this new one, maybe I should move to Italy. It doesn't matter what those maybes are for you. For each of us individually, we all have those maybes. The question is to exercise those choices. And that's the best advice I can give, is to find those choices and exercise them.
Well, let's do some plugs and get you on your way, because I've got someone right behind you. So let us know where we can find you online and purchase your books. And
Guy Morris Books. You'll find books, sites, reviews, links, fact versus fiction, press kits, all kinds of stuff.
I won't. What was that one more time?
GuyMorrisBooks.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you, Cameron.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.